Hi everybody. So I'm here to talk to you today about creating a cleaner, sharper future using programmatic to drive ad revenue. So I would like to start today by talking about the theory of diminishing returns. Hopefully it's something you guys are all familiar with. Basically, this is a simple theory for any given action. You'll start getting less output as you put more input in. So anyone who's tried to start eating healthier has probably experienced the rule of diminishing returns. You start off thinking, right, I'll eat less sugar in the week. You do one simple thing, you've got a little bit of discipline, you start losing weight, you get more energy, you're healthier, and you think, oh, this eating clean's good, I'll do more of it, and then you suddenly realize it's a lot of effort to not get very much out of it. So that's the law of diminishing returns. And what we found at Pulsepoint as we've been talking to premium publishers is the law of diminishing returns has started to apply itself to programmatic in terms of how publishers are working with programmatic vendors. What do I mean by that? So the more vendors, programmatic vendors a publisher is working with, the more money they can make. And in the early days, you'd have one partner, it'd be great, you'd make some more, you'd make some revenue. You think, right, I'll work with a second one, a third one, a fourth one. But that comes at a cost. Because complexity, your ad server starts getting more, your ad stack starts getting more complicated. You've got to have more headcount, more time to run it. And you get to this point where is the complexity, the headcount, the resource needed to bring a new vendor in worth the ad revenue you're going to get out of it? And most of the publishers we speak to are about here on this curve. So they're either at the point where I don't need another programmatic vendor, it's not worth my effort, or they're very close to being there. And when I say vendor, I'm talking about purely transactional relationship, a service, paying for a service. What we've seen from some of our more forward-thinking publishers, and when I speak to people in market, is about turning it into partnerships. Now, a lot of people throw the term partner around, but for me, when you're a vendor, you're doing a job, you're selling a service, you're doing exactly what it says on the tin, and you're taking some money for it. When you're a partner, you're working much more collaboratively. You're working to solve problems. And the more forward-thinking publishers I've been speaking to in market are looking for what they call technology partners. So these are guys who will come in and start listening to the publisher's pain points, and by working together, they can start to use programmatic technology to solve them. And by doing that, you can carry that revenue curve up beyond the traditional diminishing returns we're seeing when you were just adding new vendors to the ad stack. And you can actually, in some instances, remove some of that complexity and some of that resource cost. So you can actually start getting more out for less in. So unless you've been living under a rock for this year, you'll probably know that 2016 has been the year of header bidding. For those of you who have been under that rock, in a nutshell, header bidding is a technology that has allowed publishers to unify their demand. So if you think about the traditional ad server waterfall model, everyone moves in sequence, everyone gets their turn, it's very formulaic. What's happened is header bidding's come in, and instead of saying, right, partner one, do you want it? Partner two, do you want it? Partner three, and so forth, everyone gets a fair crack of the whip. Straight away, asynchronous auction, we call it. What that allows you to do is lower your discrepancies, because when you aren't passing the impressions down the line and so forth, you aren't timing out and losing those impressions, so you're lowering your discrepancies. You've got that increased liquidity and demand, which works for any marketplace, so you're driving up your CPMs, your fill rate's increasing, and that helps to boost your ad revenues. And all the publishers we've been speaking to this year have either implemented header bidding or are about to, and those that haven't implemented it are seeing revenue uplifts of sort of 10, 20, 30, sometimes 50+%. So there are big revenue boosts to be had out of header bidding. However, it's very much in its infancy, and the main thing I wanted to talk to you guys today about was some key considerations to think about. So when you're thinking about 2017, header bidding's come along, people are seeing these huge uplifts, but are we maximizing it? We had the waterfall for several years. We got very good at eking out as much revenue, as much return as we could with the waterfall. Header bidding, the unified auction, is definitely a better model, but I don't think we're anywhere near to fulfilling its potential. So things to think about when you think about how you want to do that. So how do you get greater efficiency? So you could be working with one header bidding partner. You implement a wrapper on your site, and you think, right, I'll bring in 2, 3, 4, 5 header bidding partners into my wrapper. And there's a school of thought to say that working with multiple multiple demand partners will bring you more liquidity. As we say, more liquidity, more yield, more CPMs, higher fill rates. It's a good thing. However, you're going to jump into that law of diminishing returns again, because if you work with 5 partners, you've probably got 5 different user interfaces to pull your numbers out of, probably 5 different methodologies for how those numbers are pulled together, and it becomes a very manual, laborious task to pull those numbers, to aggregate them together, to turn them into insight, and then action that insight to improve your header bidding ad stack. So my advice would be to look for people you can partner with who can help simplify that process. Anyone who can pull all that data into one place for you and give you a nice kind of piece of actionable insight, as opposed to you guys having to do all the legwork on your side. The second one is consider the merits of client-side versus server-side, especially as the technology develops. There's 2 main flavors of header bidding. One is client-side. That's where the auction happens in the browser, hence the name client-side. I won't go into too many specifics about how it works. Excuse me one second. But the main advantage of client-side is you can pull in multiple partners. So you can put a wrapper on your page, runs in the browser, and you can call in demand for multiple partners. The trade-off is there's a latency tax for it. Now, it's easy. You can control that. It's not going to hurt your user experience, but it can potentially hurt the amount of revenue that comes back if people are slow sending their bids, and you end up leaving money on the table. In contrast, server-side solution, that's when header bidder fires, shoots off to your header bidding vendor's ad server, and the auction happens in the ad server much, much faster. The trade-off being you don't have the same demand options. Demand is limited. So one's faster, but limited demand. One lets you pull in more demand, but has a latency tax. What we've actually found with some of the publishers we're working with is we're starting to see these hybrid models where they're using one for one thing, one for the other. Prime example being when you're on desktop, most people have a high-speed connection, and we see some publishers using client-side for desktop. That high-speed connection's there, they can run the auction, they can get everything back, they can load the page, and everyone's happy, they're getting that liquidity, and they're driving up their yield. On the flip side, on mobile, where connection speeds can vary if people are only on 3G, and user experience is paramount, you need that page to load quickly, we're seeing some publishers now step away from client side and focus on server side, so they're actually splitting their strategy. And my advice to you guys is you think about what you're doing with header bidding. As technology develops, I believe the lines between those two will start to blur, and start looking for partners who can start bringing you the best of both worlds so you can have your cake and eat it in terms of latency and demand. Third one is how can you become less dependent, or how can your ad ops team, more specifically, become less dependent on developing an engineering resource. So you think about how the waterfall works. The ad ops team basically can run that. They're responsible for pulling a lot of stuff in. They can make changes pretty quickly. They're kind of masters of their own universe. When it comes to header bidding, there's a lot more involvement from external teams. It may be to set something up, the ad ops team need to do some of the legwork, but then they need to set up a ticket. It goes to your engineering team. You've got to wait for a sprint, et cetera, et cetera. As technology develops, look for partners who are able to put more of the control straight into the hands of your ad ops, so you can implement changes faster. You can get stuff up and running faster. If you're pulling reports, you can action things quicker, and so forth. And then finally, what we've seen is header bidding has primarily been in display. It's doing very well for people. If you start ticking off the first 3 things on this list, definitely start thinking about, can you use header bidding across other formats? There is something to be said that it can't happen in display first because there's a lot more supply than there is demand, but the demand wants the premium stuff. So if you're a premium publisher, that's why header bidding has been advantageous. But even with video, where the sell-through rates are much higher, or native, which is quite nascent in programmatic, there are big opportunities to increase your yield by pulling this in. And again, when you think about complexity and the diminishing returns rule I was talking about before, if you're able to pull different channels into a single platform, you're going to reduce that complexity, and you'll be able to get more bang for your buck in terms of the effort you're putting in. So, in summary, the unified auction is here to stay. Notice I didn't say header bidding. I think header bidding is a great tool, but the nirvana is unifying the auction. Header bidding has only just begun to scratch the surface of the potential of unifying the auction. And look for partners, not vendors, but partners who can start helping you unlock that potential and be specific. You know, when you're talking to people, you're doing RFPs, you're looking for a new vendor/partner, you know, be specific about the problem you need them to solve and get them to, you know, build their technology around your requirements. And that is me.
Just one question occurs to me. The banking crisis happened because the banking algorithms and investment algorithms got so complicated that bankers had no idea what was happening and no idea about the risks they were running. Why do you think I had a thought like that while listening to you? Is there a danger that the average marketing director might not actually know fully what you're up to?
I don't think so. I'd challenge that. I'd say the bankers may have said they didn't know what was going on. I think they did. They might not. If they
Let's not worry too much about the banker. It was only an analogy.
Yeah, but
the average marketing director, they might pretend they know what you're talking about, but do you think they really do?
I think the onus is on them to make sure they understand. I'd encourage any marketing director, you know, whether it's the publisher side or the advertiser side, to ask questions and understand where you're putting your money. If you want to just buy results, you can do that, but there's a certain amount of risk within that. And as I said, when you're talking about vendors versus partners, partners will take the time to educate so people understand, so they can grow together, and it's mutually beneficial. So I would say the onus is on them to make sure they understand and don't take things at face value.
And do you think there's sufficient transparency about the outcomes?
It's getting better.
That's an admission that it's not good enough, right?
Is it perfect? No, but is anything ever perfect? We always want more.
Thank you very much indeed.